Hi, this is Simon from Tokyo Productions and welcome to another tutorial for Blackmagic Fusion. And today I'm going to be taking a look at various different techniques, including expressions and how to create macros. And in doing so, we'll be looking at creating a simple chromatic aberration effect. So I've got my shot of my Corvette racing through this tunnel here. The first thing I want to do is to split this into its separate RGB color channels. So I'm going to select my loader there. I'm going to hit Shift Spacebar and I'm going to type bol for channel booleans. And I'm going to hit F2 to rename it and I'm going to call it red. So we're just going to come over here and we're going to set everything apart from red to black. So green is going to be black and blue is going to be black. We can leave the alpha as it is because we're not concerned about that here. So if we now look at that, you'll see that we've got the red only information. So now we can hit Command C, Command V, F2 to rename it, and we'll call this one green. Let's pipe our Corvette into that, and let's look at it on the viewer. Again, we'll send black to the red channel and green to the green channel, and that'll give us the green channel only. Command C, Command V, and F2, we'll call this blue. Again, let's pipe our Corvette into that. And we'll send black to the green and the blue foreground to the blue. And that looks like that. So we now have our three color channels. At the end of the day, we're going to have to recombine them. So we might as well start on that now. So I'm going to select my red there. And again, Shift Spacebar, bol for channel booleans. I'm going to set the operation to add. And I'm going to pipe the green into the foreground. And if we look at that, we're now getting the combined red and green. And if we hit Command C, Command V, join those two together, and pipe the blue into this new version. Look at that. You'll see we're now back to our original image. So our original image, our separated and recombined image. Okay, so that's not very interesting so far. But what we're going to do next is we're going to take our red and we are going to hit Shift Spacebar and type XF for the 2D transform. Let's just hit F2 and rename this XF red. Doesn't matter what this is named, but it's very important that you're consistent with your naming. Hit OK. So if I just now take my red transform tool here, you'll see that I'm now shifting that red channel and we're getting the beginnings of our chromatic aberration effect. Just going to reset that to 0.5. And we want to apply this same transform to each of the three channels. So Command C, click on the flow, Command V, and then just holding down the Shift key, we'll add that to the green. Again, click on the flow, Command V to paste it, and holding down the Shift key, we'll add that to the blue. Just need to rename these. So XF green for the green, F2 again to rename the blue transform, XF blue. Let's tidy this up a little bit. I know some of you get very annoyed at my messy habits, so let's get everything nice and tidy. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to link the blue transform to the red transform so that when the red moves left, the blue moves right. So how are we going to do that? Well, let's come to the blue here and let's come up to the center here, center value, right click and select expression. And you can probably see we've got two values here, 2 point values. So point brackets 0.5, comma 0.5. The first value is the X value and the second value is the Y value. So what I can do is change this first value, which is the X value. And if I type XF red dot center dot X, so it's CENTER, that's the American spelling, dot capital X. That is now going to link that blue to the red. So you can see those two now move in sync with each other. But we actually wanted to move the other way. So let's come back to our expression here, and we're going to type 1 minus xf red.center.x, and that will invert the position. So come back to our red here, and you'll see that those two are going in opposite directions, and that's pretty much all that chromatic aberration actually is in the real world. But I think we can do a little bit better than that, just to make this a little bit more fun. Let's also affect the green, and let's do something slightly different there. So again, let's select the green center, right click, expression, and what I want to do is I want to link the y value of the green to the red x value. So again, I'm going to select that second value there, which is the y value. I'm going to type xf red.center.x, and now come over here, move our red value. You'll see that those three all move in opposite directions with the green going downwards, and that's going to be slightly more fun when I show you what I plan to do with it. Okay, now I just want you to look at the edges here. You'll see that as we move these elements apart, we're starting to see the edge of the frame. And there's a simple way of fixing that, is to come into each of these transforms and hit either duplicate or mirror. I think I'm probably going to go for duplicate, like that. Do the same with the green, and the same with the blue, and you'll see that's taken care of that problem. So there's one more thing I'd like to do, and that's to add a blur that's driven by the distance that the channels are separating from each other, or rather that main red driver. So I'm going to select my original loader there, and I'm going to hit Shift Spacebar and add a blur. I don't want to blur the alpha channel or the green channel. If we blur all three channels, that's going to look just like a blur of everything. But if you just blur the red and blue, it's just going to mean that at least one channel is sharp. So how are we going to get the red channel to drive this blur size? Because we don't want to have a one-to-one correspondence, obviously, because the red channel is not actually giving us a value that we can use. So we need to do something a little bit more complicated. So I'm going to select the blur size here, and I'm going to right-click, modify with expression. And this does something slightly different, and you'll see when I click on the modifiers tab here, it's created a whole new expression control panel for me. Now this looks a bit scary when you first look at it. We don't in this instance need to worry about these points 1 to 9 because they're for position parameters, and we're not concerned with position. Blur is just going to be a single value. What we are concerned about is numbers 1 to 9. And again, these are just random slots that we can assign any value to and use as variables to calculate our expression. And what we can do is we can rename them to something more user-friendly. And to rename them, we're going to come over to the Config tab here. And these are the number controls that we want to change. So we're going to open up that number controls option there. The name of number 1 is going to be blur amount, and the name of number 2 is going to be red shift, because that's going to be our red control value from the red transform. Now if we come back to our controls, you'll see that these number 1 and number 2 have changed to our new names. So how are we going to use those? Well, first of all, we need to link up our red shift to our red transform value. So we'll just do it in the normal way. We'll type equals, and here we'll type xf red.center.x. So that's something we're already familiar with. That gives us our redshift value here that we can use. And that's going to be N2. Remember, this is N1, this is N2, and all the way through to N9. And the blur amount is N1. So now we can come to our number out here, which is the expression. So bearing in mind this is driving the blur, if I just typed 100, that would give us a blur of 100, or 10 or whatever, that would give us that blur value. So we need to do something a little bit complicated because the effective 0 position of the red transform is 0.5, but when it's 0.5 we want it to be 0. So what we're going to have to do is type the following expression. So abs, open brackets, N2, which is our red shift position, minus 0.5, close brackets, and then asterisk, which is times N1, which is our blur amount. So the blur amount at the moment is 0. I'm going to enter a value of 500 just to exaggerate it. So there you go. And if we come back to our red transform here, we reset that to 0, you'll see that resets the blur to 0. So let's just move the center and you'll see that the blur increases as we get further from the center, and it works in a negative direction as well. So let me just come back to that expression and explain what that is if you're not familiar with the abs expression. So what abs does is it returns a positive value from whatever's inside the brackets. So abs minus 10 is plus 10. So say for example our x position is 0.4 and we subtract 0.5 from it, we get 0.1. If it's 0.6, we also get 0.1, and we're using that to our advantage here to always give us a positive value for the result. And then we're simply multiplying that by N1, which is our blur amount. Just to clarify the point of that blur amount, it's not actually the blur amount as such because that's been driven by the red position, but it's a multiplier to enable the blur to get up to a value that is suitable for our purposes. Now we don't really want to be presenting the user with a blur amount of 500 because that looks a bit scary. The actual value of that is only 13. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back over here and we're going to multiply N1 by 100. So times 100. And then to get the same value, all we need to do is enter a value of 5. And that'll be a lot less scary for the user. So we're more or less ready to create our macro out of this. A couple of things we need to do to tidy everything up. So the first thing I want to do is to have a control that only shifts the x value of the red rather than having an xy control for it. So just let me reset that to 0.5. And what I'm going to do is, in order to do that, I'm simply going to add an expression to this red center. So right click, modify with expression. Come over to our modifiers here. This time we're going to be using the point values. Or rather, we're going to be using the point value for the y, but not for the x. So if we come over to point out, you'll see it's got blank values there. So if I enter a value of p1x and p1y, we've arrived back at the center. And what those are referencing, obviously, is 0.1x and 0.1y, which both default to 0.5. However, I don't want to be using the point value for x. I want to be using a number slider. So I'm going to call this N1. Let's come over to the controls. Let's configure N1. So click on the config, number controls, and let's rename this master shift. So there's our value there. All we need to do is come back to our point value here, and that's giving us an x value of 0, but the default needs to be 0.5. So let's just add 0.5 plus 0.5, and that'll bring our default back into the center. So now if I adjust the master shift control, it's moving us left to right, with 0 being the default value. So there we go. So now we've got master shift on our red center, on our red X center, I should say. So just a couple of extra tidying up things to do. I'm going to hit F2 to rename this and call it expression XF red. And I'll do the same with the blur expression. It just makes it easier when we're making the macro. So expression blur. Okay, we're good to go now. So what we need to do is we need to select all the nodes that are going to be part of the macro, draw around them like that, and then right-click on any one of them and select Macro, Create Macro. So what have we got? We've got two controls that look like they're grayed out, and that's because they're the start and end of our macro. So blur one, open that out, and we see that we've got the input checkbox checked, and that's going to be our input to our macro. And our channel booleans at the end is our final channel combiner, and that output is also checked. But what we need to do is we need to access the blur value and the transform value. So there we go, there's our expression XF red. Let's open that up and let's look down for that N1 value, which we've renamed master shift. And what we need to do is click on that checkbox, and then that master shift slider will now be available in the finished macro. So the default value of 0 is good. Minimum value I want to enter -1 because we want to be able to go left as well as right. And we just need to look at the blur value. You will remember we had N1 as the blur amount. We don't need to publish that red shift, that's just an internal value. But we're going to click on the blur amount checkbox there. The minimum value is 0. The maximum value, I think we probably want to go up to 20 just to be safe. The default of 5 is probably good. So let's close that all down, and let's rename this Chromatic Aberration, and let's close it. And it says Save Changes to Macro Tool, yes. It's going to navigate to our macros folder and allow us to use this Chromatic Aberration name to save it. So the default path for macros is there, so it's within application support in your user. Okay, and hit save. So if we right click, add tool, macros, we can find our Chromatic Aberration there, and we can pipe our Corvette picture into that and look at it on the viewer, come over to our tools, and you'll see we've got our blur amount and our master shift. And we can increase the amount of blur if we want, but we'll probably leave it at 5. Now, we're just going to refine this one step further, and that's to change these screw sliders to standard sliders. So what can we do to change those? Well, we can select our macro here, right click, and we'll come to Edit Controls. And this allows us to set up the controls in the way that we want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first of all select input 1, which we can see from the name here is our blur amount. I'm going to select controls for the page, and down here where it says screw control, I'm going to switch that to slider control. You'll notice that our default range here is also been carried through, but we could adjust that here if we wanted. And let's also come to input 2, again select controls, because we want this to be on the main controls page, and let's select slider control instead of screw control, and we can hit OK. So now you'll see that our screw controls have been replaced by slider controls, and the good thing about that is that they have end stops and they don't just go on forever, and it makes life much easier. I think probably the range of that master shift needs to be much less for all practical purposes. Maybe we could fix that. Let's come back to Edit Controls. So that was input 2, if you remember, master shift, and we can set the range here. Let's set it to -0.25 and +0.25. Close that on up, and that gives us a slightly more manageable range. Could be even less, in actual fact. Okay, a couple of things I would probably do if I were building this again. I don't think I'd use duplicate for that on these transforms. I'd probably use mirror, but it really depends on what you want to be doing with it. The other thing I think I would do is I would make sure to publish the motion blur control. and maybe link them all together. But this is getting a little bit over sophisticated. So let's just finally have a look at what we could do with this fancy chromatic aberration that we've built. Let's set our blur back to 5. Let's set our master shift to 0. And what I want to do is just have it shake as it hits this point. So what I'm going to do is right click on the master shift and modify with perturb. And then I'm going to come over to modifiers where the perturb controls live. I want to set the speed up to about 40 because I want a nice brisk wobble. And the strength I'm going to set to 0. I'm going to right click on the strength and animate. I'm going to step forward 1 frame and I'm going to set that strength to 0.01. And then I'm going to come forward to about 80 and set it back down to 0. If I've set that value right, which I probably haven't, no, we could do with a stronger value for that strength. Let's go for 0.05, something like that. Okay, and then let's render that. You'll see we've got this nice little chromatic wobble there. That's a pretty cool effect. So anyway, the point of this exercise wasn't really to show you how to do chromatic aberration. It was more to show you how to start to use expressions in creative ways and also how to build a macro and then edit the controls. So I hope that's been useful. Thanks very much indeed for watching, and I hope to see you again another time.